Hey everybody, welcome to GMG Review. Today I'm taking a look at Osprey Games' new Joe McCullough authored skirmish horror warband building game, The Silver Bayonet, a war game of Napoleonic Gothic horror. So what do we got here besides a wonderfully gross Necronomicon-esque inner binding on the book? Well, we have a probably 8 to 10 figure aside head-to-head, non-cooperative, like skirmish horror game set in the Napoleonic era. The basic MacGuffin is that there is a sort of like shadow war happening inside the wars against Napoleon and his like sort of like huge legions throughout Europe, and there was like weird sky battles happening. All of these sort of like, I don't know, like kind of vaguely unexplainable phenomenon that basically reveal eventually that there's this force called the Harvest Men that is summoning things like the ancient sort of like terrors of Europe, like vampires, werewolves, ghosts, and ghouls to come and be their servants, and tearing holes into the fairy realms as well, so that things like goblins, trolls, and other worse things come in. And you represent the special forces of the various sort of nations in the Napoleonic War, going out to deal with these threats. So the Harvestmen are kind of like inscrutable, you know, mystical bad guys, and their forces, of course, are causing, you know, even more chaos and destruction amongst the horrors of the Napoleonic War. So everyone kind of has their special units to go out and do this stuff and sort of like fight these bad guys, and that's what you're going to be doing over the course of these adventures. So models, there's going to be tons of models made, of course, by North Star Miniatures. Some official stuff, I think, for the game, along with like Perry Miniatures, you know, doing wonderful Napoleonics. I've just recently purchased tons of them, along with a lot of their sort of like more medieval stuff too. Warlord Games does tons, of course. John Stallard's, I think, favorite thing is English Civil War. So that period of black powder is near and dear to him. They have some wonderful models. And of like the selection, you know, kit bashing and stuff, you will be able to make pretty much whatever you want in that era. Tables and terrain, it's a 30-inch to 36-inch board, so like 2.5 feet to 3 feet generally is going to be about the right size, and your imagination should basically take you to the Napoleonic era in Europe for terrain where you want to set it. You need some clue markers and fatigue markers, but other than that, Joe's not a big believer in you know, like cluttering up the game table. One of my favorite things about him, and something we agree on, is not having too many tokens and markers on the table over the course of a game. And then obviously he likes the cinematic effect of having cotton balls to basically show who's fired and who hasn't fired their muskets, because there's a huge cloud of smoke, of course, firing black powder. You need some D10s. That's it. It's not a D20 game. Joe wrote a non-D20 game. Oh, I don't even know what to think. And then, of course, you also need a deck of playing cards, 52 cards for all the unexplained events. So kind of a mishmash here already of some of his concepts from Rangers of Shadow Deep, Operation Last Train, and you know, his various sort of like mods and stuff he's done for Frostgrave. So a neat sort of like cross section of ideas here already that are sort of shown in. And then you need a unit sheet, a pencil, and a measuring device in inches. Welcome to the world of inches. Creating unit. Okay, so first things first, you need to select a nation. The nations available, there are 6. Of course, Joe is planning on, I'm sure, expanding these as he's a huge history buff into various other sort of like classical rips on Napoleonic units. But you can play as Austria, Britain, France, Prussia, Russia, and Spain. And your choice of nation does influence which soldiers can be recruited into your unit. If you have a hard set on playing a nation that's not in the above list, that's fine. Just pick one who's, you know, sort of like ethos would you know, embody the best, basically, the nation that you want to play as. So like, for instance, if I wanted to play as, you know, Canadians, I could pick France as my force and then have it be like Upper Canada, you know, force, and even like set the whole thing in Upper Canada. And I'm sure the Harvestmen exist across the ocean as well, doing their thing. So I could do like Couleur de Bois and Loup-Garou and stuff like that, and do like a kind of like a French Canadian thing. All right, next up, you got to create your officer. So the officer is kind of you in the game, and this process is pretty similar to making your ranger in Rangers of Shadow Deep. Even the stat lines look a little bit familiar, but the numbers are not as swingy because it's playing in the D10s. You have speed 6, melee +1, accuracy +1, so, you know, fighting, shooting, defensive 14, armor like in Frostgrave, Courage, kind of will, and then health 12, and then recruitment. Now that's actually not what you cost, that's what you get to recruit your actual team. So if you have a standard officer, they have 100 recruitment points to bring other people in when they first build their force. And then finally, you can increase your stats. So you get to increase the following things: either melee or accuracy, so become a shooter or fighter by +1, speed or health, fast or tough by 1, or courage or recruitment by 1 or 5 points if you want. So you can have a few extra dudes or be a bit braver or resistant to magic. So to give an example, Oberstlieutenant Lucas von Breck is a strong, determined man who likes to fight the enemy up close. So he takes a melee upgrade. He took a, looks like a health upgrade, so he's a strong, tough guy, and then he took a courage upgrade for a courage of 3, and he kept his 100 points of recruitment. And there he is right there in the art. All right, attributes. This is a broad sort of like bunch of skills that cover who you are and what you do. A player with your attributes basically can be taken if they have an O next to them. So a player may select any attributes on the list that are marked with an O after their name. So long as Lucas von Brecht will imagine he began his military career in the artillery, so he's going to take artillerist and hard to put down because he's very tough as his 2. So you get to take 2, I believe, to start off with. You start with 2 attributes, that's right. And then your equipment, you don't have to pay for it at all, but you have 6 equipment slots, meaning you can carry a maximum of 6 items. So you have things like a blunderbuss, breastplate, cartridge box, so extra musket balls and shot, hand weapon, heavy weapon, improvised weapon, a fencing weapon, a musket, a pistol, rifle, shot bag, or a volley gun. And some of these things take up more than 1 slot basically when you use them. So the sort of description of them, a blunderbuss is 1 slot, has an 8-inch range. It has power dice +1 for damage because you roll separate power dice for how much damage you do. Basically, the system of power dice plus your accuracy dice is kind of like rolling a d20, but less skinny, like sort of swingy, because it's not a bell curve. It's 2 dice added together. So the averages add up higher, basically. It's an interesting solution to Joe's d20 being swingy, you know, sort of like a dilemma. Breastplate, right, takes up 1 slot. A heavy weapon takes up 2 slots. A musket's 2 slots. A volley gun's 2 slots. And they have various different abilities. Special armory. These are like upgrades in... they don't take up an equipment slot, but they do count against the maximum number of special armory items that you can be selected or take as a figure. I can't remember how many your officer can start with. I don't think you actually start with any special items, but you might find them later on. So like cold iron, it's good against fairies for your weapons and your shot. A holy symbol, good against vampires and other supernatural things. Oil and torches, a salt bag. You can create salt against demons and ghosts and stuff like that. You can put salt in your shotgun and have like a shotgun. Silver shot for werewolves, silver weapons for werewolves. And then picking your soldiers. Okay, so now this is where your nation becomes really important. So you've built your officer. Your nation becomes sort of like the thing that defines who you can take. So Austria for interest, or for like their recruitment, can take an artillerist, a Damphir, so a half vampire. You get a blade. You get blades. We're all blades in this universe, Morty. Doctor, grenadier, heavy cavalryman, infantryman, junior officer, light cavalryman, occultist, sapper, supernatural investigator, tactician, or veteran hunter. Britain, on the sort of like flip side, doesn't get Damphirs, but they can have doctors, grenadiers, the same cavalrymen. They get Highlanders instead of Damphirs. They get a marine instead of an no, they get occultists as well. A marine or a native scout. Occultists they both get. They do get sappers, riflemen instead of the supernatural. No, they get supernatural investigators as well. Actually, the Britain just gets the most. Weird. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. For Austria, Britain gets 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. No bias there, Joe. I guess you get Damphirs though if you're playing Austria. France, their special thing is they can have a vivandière. I think that means a cook. Vivant means meat, I think. What does the vivandière do? I need to look it up now because my French is rusty. I haven't used it in a long time. They sell supplies. They're like nurses, sort of, and they might have the right thing for battling the supernatural. Vivandière. I don't know. I'm actually not sure what the definition of that is. Prussians can have veteran hunters, it looks like, in addition to the normal stuff. Grenadiers. Russians can have a champion of the faith. A werebear, because you gotta have werebears. Oh, I can't wait to I have warband miniature I'm going to paint. Maybe I'll play as Russians. I don't know. And then actually I'm going to play as Spain. I've already printed a bunch of models that they look like Spain. They're from Spain. They have kind of Spanish helmets. So artillerist, champion of the faith, doctor, grenadier, heavy cavalryman, infantryman, irregular, junior officer, light cavalryman, marine, native scout, sailor, sapper, supernatural investigator, swordsman, and veteran hunters. So yeah, definitely taking Spain, which means I can have a good champion of the faith, which is pretty cool. And it actually does show right here who can take what, so you don't have to refer to your list if you don't want to. Your damn fear, yeah, super fighty and strong. Doctors who get the medic attribute. Basically, you almost always have the same core stat line unless you're like a supernatural thing, like a half vampire. And then you get special equipment like muskets and cartridge boxes. You can have special attributes too, like supernatural veterans. The Highlander for the British, he's good and fighty. You can have a musket or cartridge box, heavy weapon, and a pistol. So you can have him as a shooter or a fighter. Infantryman, just a kind of irregular, so randoms. Junior officer can have a hand weapon or fencing weapon and 2 pistols. Has decent stats. And then you get any one officer attribute actually if you're a junior officer, so he's a cool thing. But if you think you have 100 points to spend, he's 22, right, out of your 100 like allotment. A cavalryman's 18. A regular Joe Blow infantryman's 10. So if you just took 10 infantrymen, you'd have 11 models, and that's probably about the cheapest you can do. I think 10 is the cheapest. Yeah, so you're looking at probably 11 to 6 or 7 if you're going in the 20s. All right, so if you're going to like an 18-point guy, like a native scout, or a 20-point like an occultist, and you're having 5 in your warband. So the model count's actually probably a bit lower than in Frostgrave, just based on the cost of recruiting guys, which is interesting. A swordsman, oh yeah, I want to do swordsman. And supernatural investigators, they're supernatural veterans, monster experts, fencing weapon and 2 pistols, or heavy weapon and pistol. Yeah, I'm taking supernatural investigators for sure. Because it's kind of like, the most famous are the agents of the Vatican who operate with units from the Catholic countries, but there are others. I'm doing the Spanish Inquisition. That's what I'm doing. I'm doing supernatural investigator, Spanish Inquisition, like heavies. That's what I want. Tactician, veteran hunter. Use the same equipment slots as an officer. So veteran hunter can just have, and they're 30. So a veteran monster hunter is the officer's right-hand man. Basically, they're not an officer, but they're like the super tough dude. And they can take an officer attribute and any of the same equipment slots as an officer, which is pretty awesome. The Vivandier, inspiring, master of cover, supernatural veteran. Again, not really a fighter, but like they have the inspiring role. A werebear, skin shift into a bear. They have a heavy weapon. And they cost 30 as well, yeah. Melee +2, defense 14, 12 health. Surprised they don't have more health and defense. That's kind of strange. All right, playing the game. So setting up the table. Before you start blazing away with your muskets, you have to set it up. So your range table, what monster tokens to place, and how to play your soldiers. They'll all be in the scenarios. And then most have 2 or more clue markers. Small markers that designate points of interest in the table. What exactly clue markers represent will vary from scenario to scenario. That kind of works the same as in Rangers. You'll have a clue marker table that will have the playing cards. You're going to shuffle up the playing cards, and then you refer to the table in the scenario. So a lot like Rangers, you'll have some cool like surprises throughout the course of the game when you go and investigate a point in the table to see what you find. The most common type of skill roll in Silver Bayonet's a check. Whenever a player is called upon to make a check, they should roll a power dice and a skill dice together and add the result. So again, like a d20, but you're rolling 2 d10s instead and then adding them together. So the power dice needs to be a different color than the skill die. Some checks have a target number. So for example, if you're called upon to roll a speed check, you need to roll a check and figure your add your figure speed. If it's 14 or higher, the check is successful. So you're rolling 2 d10s, adding whatever your speed stat is. If your speed's 6, 2d10 plus 6, you get an 8 or better on those 2 dice, you're gonna pass. Whenever you make a check, it's often important to know which die is which is your power die, which is your skill die, and which color for each is clearly stated before the start of the game. And then it's played in turns. Each turn, a player will activate each of their figures in their units, enabling them to move and take other actions. Each turn is broken into 5 phases. So you've got the initiative phase. Each player's making an initiative check. The player that rolls the highest becomes the primary player, while the other player should become the secondary player. If at any point players roll a 2 or a 20, then you get a special result, which could be defined by the scenario. Player 1, primary player 1 phase. During this phase, the primary player must activate half the members of their unit that are on the table rounded down. So it's not I go, you go. It's not the model, the activation sort of advantage of things in like early Frostgrave First Edition doesn't exist in this. It's always going to be half. So the primary player has 7 models on the table, they must activate 3. If they have 1, they must activate 1, and there's no other limitations. Then the monster phase. During this phase, all the monsters on the table activate and take their actions. And then the secondary player phase. In this phase, the secondary player must activate all the members of their unit that are on the table, and then primary player phase 2. So basically, when you win the initiative, half your team goes, then the monsters go, then the whole second player gets to go. So basically, player 2 has had to deal with half of your team going and all the monsters activating, but then he gets to go with whatever he's got left, and then the primary player 2 gets to do the last half of their model. So it's an interesting turn dynamic because it splits. Basically, you can get the jump, but half your guys are going to have to wait, and then player 2 is going to get to go with everything they have left. So they set up defensively, they've got to fight all the monsters and then go afterwards. So this is a really interesting player sort of like turn. And also, you don't get to choose if you're primary or secondary. It's based on the roll. So if you roll higher, you're stuck being primary. There's not a choice there. So 2s and 20s, if you roll a 20, you should immediately add either a power die or a skill die to their fate pool. In addition, you should make a roll on the unexpected event table, which is right here. So like for instance, you could get it starts to rain heavily or a lucky find. Both players choose a figure. The figure is immediately granted 1 item from the special armory. Used for the rest of this scenario. If you roll a 2, then the player should immediately add an extra monster dice to the fate pool. In addition, the player should make a roll on the unexpected encounter table and place a new figure as instructed. So the fate pool and the power pool are basically extra dice that will affect the game turn. So unexpected encounters. Anytime a player rolls a double 1 for initiative, they should immediately roll 2 dice and compare the results to the table below. This creature should then be placed in the center of a randomly determined table edge. So you could have a demon show up, a troll, a living suit of armor, a changeling, a scarecrow, a hobgoblin, or a dark wolf, or a vampire. And then each turn, each figure on the table will activate exactly once. Whenever they're activated, it may move and take one of their actions, such as shoot, reload, or investigate, or any of the other actions listed elsewhere in this book. If it doesn't want to do those actions, it's able to move again. If the player moves a figure, to activate, a figure must fully complete its activation before any of the figure can go. If it's not possible to take a figure's action or move, then save the others until later on during the turns. You can't split your actions and go to somebody else. Facings are 360. Obstructions. The battle takes place in a variety of terrain, and so of course you can be slowed down by terrain. Typically you're going to move. If a figure desires, it may use its action to sprint. There's a special action in that it can only be used after a figure has already taken a move action. It may not be used before a figure moves. To sprint, the player should make a sprint check. If the result's 11 or higher, the figure may move another 4 inches. If the result's 10 or lower, they may move another 2 inches. So basically, sprinting is your second action move, but it might be further or shorter, basically, depending on whether or not you make your movement check. So a nice difference there from Frostgrave, where it's just move. Having your terrain for difficult grounds, moving off the table, you can do that in certain scenarios. Moving to attack is when you move into base to base. And then forced attack, anytime a figure activates a move or move within 1 inch from the opposing figure, the opposing figure can force the issue. Immediately move the opposing figure into contact. The active figure must then make an immediate attack as though it had made a move to attack action. A figure with 2 fatigue tokens can never force the attack. Monsters will always force the attack unless they also have 2 fatigue tokens. Remember, this rule comes into play when a figure is active and making a move or move to attack action. It's not used when a figure backs off from combat or is otherwise forced to move. If a figure moves within 1 inch of an opposing figure, it must still make a move or move to attack action to trigger this rule. So a bit different from forcing combat in Frostgrave. Jumping requires tests. Falling can happen, but you must make a speed check for every if you're within 1 inch of a potential fall and take damage. So basically, if you are near a ledge and you take any damage, you might fall off and then take damage. If a figure's in contact with a clue marker and no enemy figures are within 1 inch, it can spend an action to investigate. Alternatively, a figure can forego its move for the activation in order to also investigate. Immediately draw a random card from the clue marker table and check it and see what it is. And then loading and reloading. Once a figure uses a firearm to shoot, the figure must reload it in order to take another shoot action. To reload a weapon, you spend an action to reload. Only 1 firearm may be reloaded per reload action, so if you have multiple unloaded ones, you can't do it. And then during a game, it's important to keep track of which figures a loaded firearm or not. A simple way to do this is placing a small ball of cotton wool in front of them when they've fired to see that the black powder's gone off. Melee combat, you can, if a target survives the attack, either because the attack missed or because it is health remaining after taking damage, as a choice, can either strike or back off. So basically, you're going to roll your power. You're going to make a melee check with a power die and a skill die added together, and add the figure's melee stat. If the result is equal to or greater than the target's defense stat, a hit has been scored and damage should be calculated. If the result on the skill check is less than the target's defense stat, the attack is missed. So basically, you're going after your defense. So the defense here is not like armor in front. It looks like armor, but it's actually your roll needed to hit. So it's slightly different. To calculate the damage, check the weapon being used. Each weapon either uses the power dice or skill dice as its base damage, and some have extra modifiers. So this is where we, again, diverge from Frostgrave. So you're going to roll 2d10. You're going to try and hit the defense number to hit, so like average of 13 or 14. And once you hit, the weapon that you're actually hitting with will say which of the 2 dice you just rolled. So like a fencing weapon, for instance, uses skill, whereas a heavy weapon, I think, uses power for its damage dice. There you go. So blunderbuss, power dice +1. A rifle is the skill dice. A pistol is the power dice. And same with your melee weapons. Where is that? Heavy weapon, power dice +1. Hand weapon, improvised weapon, power dice -1. Fencing weapon, skill dice. And that's just the amount of health that you take. So there's no like armor reduction in this one. It's which of the 2 dice is inflicting the damage, add your weapon modifier, and then take that off your health. And if you survive, you can have a choice. You can either strike back or back off. If you choose to strike back, you should immediately make a melee attack against the figure that just attacked it. This follows all the same rules, except the new target survives. It must back off. It cannot choose to strike back, as it's already made an attack disactivation. So basically, instead of being a simultaneous combat like in Frostgrave, you swing. If you hit and kill, they're dead. Otherwise, they get to swing back. So the active player can actually just totally take some of the action, or do a little bit of damage, but then take damage back. It was kind of all or nothing in Frostgrave, and I like this strike back ability with the option to break off too. It's a bit more dynamic than the system in Frostgrave. And then fatigue and distraction. If a figure is involved in multiple melee attacks in the same turn, as either attacker or defender, it begins to tire. As soon as the melee attack ends, all figures are given a fatigue token. This is a bit like in Bushido. For each fatigue token, you suffer -1 of your defense and melee stats, so that's easier to hit and less likely to hit your opponent. Remember that if you have fatigue tokens at the end of a melee attack, after all results are determined, so when a figure strikes back, they'll do so before they gain the fatigue token. And then if the closest enemy figure is within 2 inches of the active figure, it may spend their action to give that enemy a fatigue token. Doing so ends the figure's activation immediately. This represents the figure distracting the enemy, making it easier for its allies to strike. So basically, if you are in melee with somebody and you're within 2 inches, you can have that person just fatigue them by like dancing around, distracting them during the course of the combat. So it's a very different gang up bonus than in Frostgrave, but I like that. A figure may never move have more than 2 fatigue tokens, no matter the source, and then all fatigue tokens are removed at the end of each turn. So that's where you lose your sort of like interact bubble too. So you have 2 fatigue tokens, you can't jump to engage someone when they walk by. And there you go. The active figure makes a move to attack. The active figure rolls a melee check against the target. The melee check is equal to or greater than the defense. It hits. Determine any damage. If the target's alive, they can strike back or back off, and then both gain a fatigue token at the end. Shooting attacks, basically the same. It's against the defense stat. If they have range and line of sight. If some parts of the target are obscured, they get cover. Once the target's been deemed to be within range and line of sight, you make a shooting attack. Same roll as a melee attack. If the shooting attack is equal to the defense, and if you're looking at the modifier table, if the target's in cover, you're -1 to your roll. If the shooting figure is mounted on a horse, you're -2. Active figure has made a move, you're -1. So those are your check modifiers. And if you're alive after the shooting check, you have a choice. You can return fire, dive for cover, or do nothing. If you choose to return fire, if you have a loaded weapon, then you can make a shooting attack. If you dive for cover, you can immediately move 2 inches in any direction. And otherwise, you can just do nothing. Note that unlike making a melee attack, making a shooting attack does not automatically end your figure's activation. Once a figure finishes a shooting attack, it may still move, including making a move to attack. Also, no fatigue tokens are gained by either figure from a shooting attack. So shooting is a bit more dynamic. And some examples. Cavalry can mount and dismount. Terror checks, so if your things are scary. The soldiers who join the specialist units are all veterans. However, they may be called upon to make a terror check. And so it's going to be a courage check against whatever the TN is. and then modified by these following things. If a figure has to make a terror check at -3, it would roll a check, add their courage, and then apply anything, and look at this table. So the higher it is, 11 plus, no effect. You're unfazed and takes no penalties. 9 to 10, you're distracted, -1 to all checks until the next of your activation. 7 to 8, stunned, ends your activation immediately. 5 to 6, shaken. So you're going to make basically your check with your modifier, and then see what your results is in the table. So it's not a fixed target number, it's usually a penalty. So the more scary something is, the bigger the penalty is going to be to whatever your check is, the lower you could roll. So at 2 or less, you just collapse. You just go and you have to roll in the madness table after the game. You go straight up HP Lovecraft and see something cyclopean and terrifying. Then the fate pool. At the start of each game, a player should assemble their fate pool. The fate pool consists of extra dice that are kept to one side and can be used in a variety of ways. So each player should start by taking the following dice into the fate pool: 2 power dice, 2 skill dice, and a monster die. Some units may have special rules that increase or decrease this, and of course you can gain them by rolling a 20 on your check, gain an extra power die. Dice from the fate pool can be used in several ways, for either rerolls, negating damage, to quick reload, or as a monster dice. Players must decide to use their dice from their fate pool immediately after giving a roll. So if a player makes a melee check, they must decide if they want to use any of the dice from their fate pool before their opponent decides whether or not to use the dice to try and negate any damage. Once they've done so, it's too late to try and modify the melee check. In cases where players should potentially use a fate die at the same time, like with a monster dice, the primary player must decide first. If this modifier modifies the monster's action, either shooting or movement, the other player may not use a monster dice to modify it again. Once dice is used from the fate pool, it should be put aside. There's a few ways to regain them, but mostly they're just gone. They're a precious resource. So anytime a player rolls a check, they may roll either the power dice or skill dice by using the equivalent dice from the fate pool. So if you pull your power dice out of the fate pool, you don't add it, you re-roll the die. And then negating damage. Anytime a figure takes damage, they may use a power or skill dice to negate some. You roll the d10 and reduce the damage. And then quick reload. Whenever a figure activates, a player may spend either a skill die or power die from their fate pool to reload a weapon. And then monster dice. They work in a similar but slightly different fashion to the other dice in the fate pool. Whenever a monster makes a check, either player may decide to use a monster dice from their fate pool to reroll either the power dice or the skill dice. In this case, however, the reroll replaces the original roll if it's higher than the original roll. So basically, a player cannot use monster dice to try and make a monster achieve a worse result. They can only make it better. So you can rile up the monsters when they're attacking your opponent, try and make them fight harder, which is funny. And then finally, a monster dice can be used to modify the monster's action. When a monster is going to make a shooting attack, a player can spend a monster die to change the target to a different legal target. Likewise, when a monster is about to move towards a figure, it can spend a monster die to have it move towards a different one. So the monster is kind of like your like knowledge of the supernatural, letting you like mess with the monsters on the table to do different things. And then monster actions. It has like a skill tree, kind of like in Frostgrave, to see what it does. So does it have an unloaded projectile weapon? Yes. It will reload the weapon using its move action. Does the monster have a loaded projectile weapon and a soldier in range and line of sight? Yes. Makes a shot. No. Moves. Line of sight, the monster tries to move to fight. And then reactions. If the monster is the target of a shooting attack, it will always choose to return fire. If it survives melee, it will always choose to strike back. And then ending the game. The game ends in 2 ways. Most commonly, one side or the other will achieve their objective, such as recovering an artifact or something, killing somebody. The other way a scenario can end is if one player has no figures left, or if they've moved off the table edge. In that case, it all ends immediately. And that's the basic rules of the game. So then we got campaigns. I'm not going to spend too much more time on this, but basically it's got the usual check for death, earn experience, level up. And then we've got 10 scenarios in the book. Investigation, the Revenants, the Troll Bridge, Confirmed Kill, Sunken Treasure, Haunted Ruins, Last Stand, a Lugaru Surprise, an Infested Monastery, and the Ship in the Fog. And you play through these, and I don't want to spoil them because of course they have like random clues and random events and activities that come from the pools. Now there are solo play rules in here, and that will allow you to play some of these like without an opponent and create a narrative. So the turn changes a little bit. You make your specialist unit. You still use your fate pool but modified, and you have like scenarios and scenario creation rules for solo play and for additional stuff. So it is a competitive game, but with all these stuff and basically available, Joe did put in solo rules. So you've got some ability to play this by yourself if you want as well. And then your bestiary. We got bandits, black dogs, which is a bad luck sign in Europe, changelings, cultists, dark wolves, demons and ghosts, vampires, vampire bats, werewolves. Rules for making your own monsters, which is pretty cool. Your unit sheet, and that's it. Some ads for some official figures and stuff too with the Nosferatu and stuff. And that's the Silver Bayonet. So there we go, some horror games set in Napoleonic Europe. I'm pretty pumped for this. I think it's gonna be a lot of fun for doing some like dark Blanchitsu-y style painting, some like creepy horror themed like quasi-medieval, early Napoleonic sort of like terrain, and I'm pretty pumped for it. So Jay and I are going to play through the 10 missions in this book, hopefully, over the next few months, and I'm starting my unit right now, so you can check it out on the paint table. I'll be playing as Spain. I'm not sure what Jay's going to be playing as, but you'll see that coming up soon, and hopefully we'll be able to do a Let's Play the next few weeks. I am really excited that Joe took the opportunity writing this book to take sort of like the core sort of like principles of his previous games like Rangers and Frostgrave and do some new stuff with it. He still has a flex of 20 points in his dice rolls, but I really like the power and skill dice being separate. I love the fate pool modifying things. It's Rangers and Frostgrave kind of having a baby a little bit with the Middle-earth strategy battle game. And it's going to be an interesting blend of different stuff. The action structure is a little bit different. It feels like he's really kind of finessing and fine-tuning what he likes in a game and making it a little more tailored to the setting. Like this feels like it's got a lot more, like being able to return fire, being able to make checks to dash, the madness that could happen in the madness table and the courage check. It just feels a little more narratively like dynamic, and I'm pretty excited about it. So we'll see you for some Silver Bayonet in the future. Till then, I'm Ash. Hey there, I hope you enjoyed that video. There are tons of other games already recorded for you to watch. Click over to my channel page if you haven't already, and have a look through the dozens of playlists full of videos. I guarantee you'll discover a game you haven't seen played before. I put out new videos 7 days a week, and every day is themed to a different genre as I continue to explore the wider world of gaming. Of course, none of that's possible without you, the viewer, so click a like and subscribe if you'd like to stay on top of what's happening here daily. My 2 kids and I are massively grateful to be able to have the flexibility of this job so I can always maximize my time with them. If you want to support me continuing to put out this content, it's only possible because of my amazing backers on Patreon who support the studio, equipment, and model cost, as well as being how I make the bulk of my living. You can also help out by buying a t-shirt through Spreadshirt, a measuring gauge or widget from Death Ray Designs, or buying one of my games and supplements like Last Days, Gamma Wolves, and Blaster. As a way of showing my appreciation, patrons get early access to new games and supplements that I write throughout the course of the year. Huge thanks for watching, it really does help out, and happy gaming.